So I'm delighted to welcome writer-director Dáire McNab and the actor Matthew O'Brien, who plays Emmett in this. Guys, you're both very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Dáire, I'm going to start with you. This is your, I believe, your fourth project after Gingerbread Man and the Three Sisters, to name a few. But can you just tell me, before we get into the last role, what was your journey towards filmmaking? How did you end up making these works?
Well, I suppose I when I was younger, I wanted to be a footballer, then a golfer, then a snooker player. Didn't succeed at any of them. Whereas then I kind of realized that the arts have less of a kind of an age cap on it. So yeah, if you're not a footballer by a certain age, you're never going to make it. Whereas you can become a filmmaker age 70, so you can kind of always chase a dream. So it was something that didn't have kind of a time frame on it. But I was always interested in films and writing, so I kind of went to college and studied film in Trinity, and got involved in the society there. And then just after leaving college, there was kind of the recession hit, and there wasn't much, there weren't many opportunities. So I kind of self-funded my first film then. It's called The Farm. It was a horror film. And then the plan was hopefully that would kind of get me an in to the industry, but hasn't quite happened. But I've just kept plugging away on the outside, I suppose, ever since.
Well, there's a great kind of amount of, I suppose, Irish filmmakers, like an independent work, kind of working outside the system, who kind of work consistently and just keep making like really, really good stuff as well, which I think we should all be very proud of, as well as the kind of funded films. So that's great to hear. Matthew, before we kind of get into this with you, how did you become an actor? Was it something you always wanted to do?
No, I just wanted money, and then I found out that there was none in it. So no, I just kind of, originally I wanted to be a filmmaker, and then I kept directing people, telling them how to do things, and I kind of got coerced to in front of the camera. But yeah, I kind of stumbled into it. Went to Bray Institute of Further Education, did a PLC there, and then went to Swansea to do my degree. And yeah, you kind of just keep falling forward into it. I think most actors will tell you that. I think if you have a plan, it'll just disintegrate like a sponge cake in winter.
In this industry, no plan survives first contact, certainly. So yeah, you have to roll with it a bit. So Dáire, tell us about the last role. Where did the idea for this, and particularly the kind of documentary style around it, come from?
Well, I suppose the style kind of came from the obvious touchstones like the Office and Curb Your Enthusiasm and stuff. I like the idea of allowing actors a bit of freedom and not kind of having to retake something because the lighting's not perfect in a shot. I kind of like just kind of creating a space within which they can work and kind of try and find the humor within that. And also I've made, like, my first film was a kind of a horror film, and I made that the same way. Just they didn't have to hit marks necessarily. They didn't have to say the lines exactly as written. It was just the script was there for them, but it was a framework in which they could work. So in terms of how I came to it in my career, I had made 3 films and had sold 2 of them to American companies, but hadn't really, hadn't opened as many doors as I hoped. So I was kind of debating whether or not to keep going with it, or maybe to switch over to just writing like stories and novels and stuff. So I decided I'd give it one last roll of the dice, so to speak, and was going to base it around a filmmaker making one last film. It was kind of going to be the same story, but just focused. With Matthew's character was going to be the lead, but then I thought that'd be too kind of maybe self-indulgent, so I switched it to
meta. Let's not call it self-indulgent.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it is still exceedingly meta / self-indulgent. But yeah, I just thought maybe an actor would be more identifiable for people, and so I kept a lot of my original ideas, but I just slotted in another character and kind of built the film around him.
And the humor in it, like you mentioned that you like leaving space for your actors to kind of work around, but it's quite hard to write comedy because what looks funny on a page doesn't necessarily always kind of work out when acted exactly as the text. How did you go about kind of writing, I suppose, because there are some amazing kind of lines in it, and I know they've probably some of them been improvised, but for you, like writing comedy, is that a particular skill set you're proud of having, or is it something you struggle with?
I mean, whether or not it's any good, I find comedy easy enough. Like, the ideas come easily to me. I kind of think I kind of visualize things more than as images and sounds rather than just words on a page. So like it's hard to actually distill it into the script, but it's easy. I know what I want and I know how to get that. So and because I'm writing and making it myself, I know on the day what I need to do to achieve that. But there was also in this film like a lot of space for improv. We were working we were working from a treatment more than the script. I kind of would write a rough script for a lot of scenes, like, but it would be one draft, and it would be, you know, just kind of to give them a framework again to work off. And there'd be like occasions, sometimes there'd be lines, specific lines I'd want them to say, or turns of phrase, but you know, it was really up to the actors to kind of, you know, I kind of helped them build the characters, but once they knew the character and they knew the scenario, they were able to kind of not quite cut loose, but you know, try things and throw stuff at the wall and see what stuck.
And is that the way you've worked since The Farm? Like you would have kind of gone from a treatment and then had kind of sketches and then some specific things in scenes that you get the actors to work in, or was it different this time?
I've gone back and forth. Like the Gingerbread Man, which is my second film, which is the other feature comedy I've made, that was scripted, properly scripted. There was like something like 50 speaking roles in that, so you know, and a lot of them were kind of just one or two lines, so I couldn't really afford to give every extra space to improvise because we'd be there all day. So that like went through 5 or 6 drafts, so that was properly written. And I suppose the treatment for the last role, they go through, you know, a lot of work, but the actual scripted dialogue was just kind of dashed off to give people a sense of what I wanted. And the previous film I made, which is a thriller film called Three Sisters, was shot the same way as this, whereas it was kind of a 10-12 page treatment was kind of the blueprint, and then I'd just, you know, the day before shooting a scene, I'd knock off a script, you know, as a guide, but you know, the actors wouldn't have to stick to it at all.
Oh, brilliant. Matthew, I'm going to bring you in here as well. I'm going to ask you a bit about like how, you know, I suppose how that worked for you as an actor, that kind of process. But how did you become involved in the last role in the first place?
I was doing a Shakespeare in Dublin, and a friend there I was doing with Neil Fleming, who's in Kin and stuff like that. He's a great actor himself. He mentioned Dáire to me, and he said, you know, the way he makes films, it's a kind of guerrilla. I don't know, guerrilla style. It was just very it was about the acting, it was about the performance, and it was about the comedy and stuff like that. So he was bigging Dáire up, and then I met Dáire in Dundrum, and I think I auditioned in Costa or something like that. You just give me some dialogue to run, and we just kind of, I don't know, you know when you meet someone, you know you're going to be able to work with very easily, because you can have a conversation that's completely opposite to what you're about to do. And I know that's not always the case, but it was very clear to me that he knew what he wanted first and foremost, and also I found him funny. So those two things help when you're endeavoring to do a comedy. And I think we had a meeting of the minds in terms of our comedic influences, quotes from different things, and that kind of lark, which was handy then, because that was your shorthand. You know, you could say something like this from this, and you can kind of work from it with there. And then, of course, I loved the idea that the majority of it was, as Dáire said, a framework to work within, and then just kind of go with it. Because again, we would do several takes, and if Dáire likes something, we go, we'll explore this more, or what if you said it this way? And it was very very kind of easy way to shoot, and funny, because I felt that the prime objective actually when we were shooting it was to make each other laugh, and that's always nice, so that at least no one else laughs. We were having a good time. But
well, yeah. I think that's the route to good comedy. Like if you're making yourselves laugh, then that'll resonate with someone else, definitely. Like if you're trying to make a fictitious audience laugh, I don't know if it ever really works. An imagined audience, should I say. Dáire has mentioned, I suppose, The Office and Curb as some of the influences there, but you said you had this nice shorthand in terms of the comedy styles you were looking at. What would have been some of the other ones you'd have looked at coming into this?
Oh, I mean, for me, it would have been definitely Partridge, Alan Partridge. I just think the desperation that Partridge has is something that can be, you know, used, and a bit of an influence, especially to the character, because he has this desperation to please and to do it right. And of course, Spinal Tap as well. Kind of the absurdity of Spinal Tap I loved, but again rooted in realism. and awkwardness. I
Awkward.
love that when you can kind of just look at yourself and go, right, you look at previous works, or when you tried to be an actor originally, and you kind of, at the time, you were so enmeshed in it and involved with it that you thought you were something else. It's just, I love deconstructing that and taking the absolute piss of yourself, which I think is very important.
Absolutely. Is that something that's important to you as well, Dáire? I mean, like, I think there's, like, within it, there's quite a few meta nods. Like, there's an early scene I really liked where the character's talking to his agent and kind of has got on this program, is looking for payment, and he hands him like 4 or 5 copies of the Gingerbread Man as currency instead, which I think is brilliant and kind of ties it into, I suppose, your other work. But that kind of self-referential kind of meta style thing, it's very interesting to kind of, I suppose, do that in a guerrilla kind of style. How do you approach that?
Yeah, it was something that I had to think about a lot before this, because I kind of came to it trying to make something that would appeal to anyone, because very few people would have seen any of the other works I've made, and that kind of was the starting off point. So I had to kind of assume that nobody knew anything. But I am a character in it myself. There's, not to kind of complicate things too much for anyone who hasn't seen it, but Matthew's playing a director within the film. He's directing a film within the film. I, as the director of the film, pop in every so often and break the fourth wall. And I'm playing a kind of a heightened version of myself, who initially I was going to be kind of a contrast to Matthew's character, but then I decided it would be funnier if I was actually, kind of him without the kind of the charm and the likability. So I kind of pushed myself to be even worse. So I had to think about how to let people know who I was and what I'd done in my career, and poke fun at my career or lack thereof in a kind of a way that would, I wanted to kind of do that in a shorthand way that would kind of give my character a bit of a backstory. So I figured that kind of, it's a bit of a, it could come across as an in-joke the way we're describing it, but the idea was to kind of show the audience that I have made stuff before, but they're unsuccessful. So it was kind of trying to encapsulate in a few seconds.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I wasn't aware of the Gingerbread Man by name. When I saw the scene, I thought that scene was just really funny by itself, but then afterwards, having looked it up, it took on another dimension. So it works really well on that. It's funny in and of itself if you don't know that, but then has another layer once you do.
Yeah, the idea was I mean, the kind of the everything had to be funny, more so. The important thing was to kind of be funny in this, but if possible, there'd be something else there that, whether or not you want to engage with it, like, if people watch it a second time, there'd be maybe more stuff for them to uncover without it being too obtuse or difficult to access. I think it's more accessible than, it's almost easier to watch it than to describe it. You'd spend as long describing it as you would just to watch it from start to finish.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because you mentioned it's kind of meta within meta, and like you break the fourth wall and then that wall breaks its own fourth wall kind of thing. Did you, like, as you said, it's hard to describe, but did you ever have any difficulty kind of explaining that kind of to your cast or any of the crew kind of working on it, like kind of getting exactly the kind of tone and style you were going for?
I'd worked with most people before. I think actually Matthew and Hannah are the only two that I hadn't worked with before. Like Matthew said, when we met, we kind of immediately clicked. I think Partridge, which I forgot to mention with my reference points, Partridge was probably the main thing that we kind of had as a shorthand, and the main, like, it's not just there's similarities to Partridge, there's also differences, but it was kind of a shared influence on both of us. And within like 5 minutes of meeting, we were kind of tossing quotes back and forth, but then we did a quick read through of the scene, as he said, and he just immediately kind of switched into the character, and he had that kind of the glint in the eye that is Emmett's kind of like hallmark. So I kind of knew then that he got it straight away. So I didn't have to actually, I just sent him on then the full treatment for him to kind of read and hopefully understand, and he seemed to get it, and from day one he was on board. And Hannah is like a friend of mine who knows me, so she kind of knew what to expect. So I think I was kind of fortunate in that everyone had either worked with me before or immediately kind of slipped into the way of doing things. So it was fairly easy process in that sense.
I remember Hannah from my time around Galway, and I know she's done an awful lot of theatre work and stuff, but this seemed like quite a different thing to what I might have been used to seeing her in, but she's also terrific in this. Did you have her and any of the other cast, like Matthew or any of the other guys, like, did you kind of do any kind of workshopping with them beforehand? What was the kind of prep process like with the actors as you were working from a treatment, as you said?
Yeah, yeah, we did. Elliot, who plays Evan, who's the aspiring actor in the film, he himself and Hannah, I think, had a couple of at least one, if not two, kind of afternoons with me, just kind of workshopping. But yeah, we didn't work with Matthew at all. He was kind of busy in the run up to it. He was doing panto, I think. So we just like, yeah, I think Matthew just kind of hit the ground running. Like on day one, like
it was I do remember the one scene that we did run. I think we met one evening, and it was the scene where I was trying to get Hannah to kiss Elliot, and then he wasn't doing it right, and it was just the right amount of awkwardness, you know, because there's this kind of, it's a happy medium. I do remember that was the key into it. Like, once I knew that there was these boundaries that we kind of push a little bit, then I knew, okay. Because I do find the film in particular, when we were preparing for it, like, to be cathartic insofar as we could all exercise our bad experiences within the industry. We could go, remember that, Jerry, I was at this audition once. And
I'm going to say, Matthew, because you mentioned like you want to get into directing initially and then kind of playing this kind of bitterish director, let's say. Like, was that kind of meta for you as well within the overall meta narrative we have here?
Yeah, you know, and then we could kind of, I mean, there was a scene about profit share, and it was just that wrote itself. We literally just give the theme, riff on that, and we did. I remember that in particular because we've all been promised the world, and it was just so easy to riff on. But yeah, but it was in terms of prep for it, that everyone, and I think it feels like almost like two. I mean, this is the meta nature of the film. But there's like two distinct kind of stories being told. There's a beautifully tragic one with Elliot, and then there's this like absurd fucking cacophony in the other direction, you know.
That brings me on to my next point. You guys are writing this for me as well. It's very helpful. Dáire, you did mention there is that kind of like, I suppose, emotive story with Elliot, and then this absolute absurdity around it, which again, I think Partridge is a brilliant example for. But did you ever find it difficult kind of balancing that, I suppose, in the direction and keeping the tone kind of consistent while also having those two kind of gears going?
Not really, because I think Elliot is the sort of person who he kind of went into the film convinced that he was just kind of the straight man and the boring character that, you know, that no, like he's very kind of, you know, he kind of didn't like his own character and was willing to kind of, well, I wouldn't say didn't like it, but, you know, but he was willing to kind of take a back seat at times, and he's also like very funny on occasion, but he's willing to kind of play up the seriousness of it and let, you know, maybe Matthew kind of go nuts around him. And just again, like, you know, they just had good chemistry, and it kind of, the interactions kind of worked, I think. I mean, you know, whether or not they did is for other people to decide, I suppose, but I was always kind of happy with the interplay between this you got a kind of the serious tragicomic aspect and then just the more kind of satirical side of it.
No, I think it absolutely works incredibly well on that. Let's talk a little bit about pre-production and stuff. So you'd worked with a lot of the crew and cast before. You had Matthew and Hannah involved. How did you go about prepping for the shoot, like in terms of securing locations, time, funding, all that stuff? What was the process for you on that?
Well, they were all kind of tied in that I had very little funding, which meant I had very little time to shoot. So I think we shot it over, I think if you add it up, it was 8 days. I think it was block of 4 days, block of 3 days, and then a couple of half days. Yeah, I used my parents' house as the main location because, you know, again, it was readily available. I think I paid for them to go away to a B&B or something. So I just got them out of the way. So then we kind of had to run the house. Use my own apartment in town as well as Elliot's character's house. So yeah, just kind of I think every film I've made has got a smaller budget than the previous one. So, you know, this was a case of the smallest one yet, trying to kind of maximize what I already had without having to spend, you know, the only expenditure really was on like food and, you know, very, very small token salaries to the actors. It was just a case of getting it done as quickly and as cheaply as possible, really.
And that works well because you've got within, I suppose, the style of the film, as you mentioned, right? lets you play to those kind of strengths almost, like the kind of lo-fi nature of it. Is that how you kind of write something, like you have to write it for the, you know, the resources you're going to have, and kind of within that, do you know that kind of writing it, or do you ever kind of write something that's like, oh, this is what I do if I had like 100 grand?
I suppose previously, yeah, maybe I have written kind of my best case scenario treatments or scripts and then kind of pared it down to suit the budget. Whereas this time I kind of gone into it, I wanted to match the idea with the resources or the concept. So I kind of figured that this is an idea that I don't necessarily think that if I had, you know, £1 million to make it, that it would have opened any doors that weren't already open. You know, I didn't need any more resources or any other crew or cast that weren't already available to me. It was kind of, instead of cutting back to fit the restrictions that were in place, it was kind of having the restrictions in place as a starting off point and then letting the story kind of fill that space.
Yeah, that's great. Like there's a, without over intellectualizing things, there's a line from, I think it was Wordsworth, always like that, you put in these strictures in like poetry or something, and it's a great prison for somebody's too long known freedom. It helps kind of focus you, which I think is always really great. Matthew, we'll get back to you on the shoot. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity, as you said, for improv and kind of ad-libbing and stuff along. So how did you approach this coming up to the shoot? Like, did you kind of have an idea in your head, like, oh, I might say these kind of things, or were you just kind of prepared to be kind of fairly reactive and improvisational?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, I think, you know, paralysis through analysis, you know, if you think you're going to say something funny, it's probably going to fall flat in its face. So it was great to have the chats. And as I said, we would go for maybe a take that's 2 or 3 minutes long, where we would just riff, and then we could punch in and say, okay, that bit there, we could maybe expand upon, or, you know, say this or do this. It was great to have, as Dáire was saying, that space, you know, once the frame was set there. But again, improv is just one of them things. It's the closest, I suppose, to stand up you'll get to without being an actual stand up, you know. You kind of have to throw it out there and not think too much about it, and hopefully it's funny. And of course, Elliot is great.
It certainly is funny, I have to say, so that works.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear.
Matthew, you've just been muted there somehow. Oh, and you're gone now. Okay, we've lost Matthew.
Hello,
there
sorry.
You are. No, it's okay. These things happen.
I bored the screen to death. It went black on me. But no, yeah, just kind of have to throw stuff and see what sticks. And if it does, it does. If it doesn't, you know, you go and try something differently.
Yeah. And Dáire, for you, was it ever a concern that just something just would not work at all? Like, or were you always confident with these actors you had that, like, when you'd done your riffing, that you'd get where you needed to be?
Yeah, I think you know, it's always a like a worry, but you know, I think we had, yeah, the actors were more than up to the task of, you know, of delivering. I suppose we had, like, I had for every scene I had kind of an outline with every few ideas within that. Isn't like, you know, you can talk about this or talk about that, and I knew that one or other would get to the end point, and then we'd film every scene from start to finish. We wouldn't like cut it up into little bits, you know. We just film from start to finish, and then, as Matthew said, maybe pick out a line that worked, or a, you know, an idea that kind of might have just arisen organically, and then just develop that. But because of the way the first take had gone, you know, they'd have hit certain points that they kind of were instructed to hit. You know, I could just bring it back into one of those points later on, you know, and we had an exit point for every scene. So again, it's just having that structure and building that structure and having that in place, and then giving the actors room within that to improvise. And like, because I was editing it myself, you know, I was kind of editing roughly in my head as we went. So I think every scene I knew when we finished it that I had more than enough to go on and to get what I wanted out of it. So I was, you know, it literally was the only time I've made a film that I've actually enjoyed the process.
Oh wow, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
Matthew,
okay,
for you, like,
you want to talk, man?
It's very stressful. Look at your own character in the film, see how he reacts to making a film. It can get quite stressful.
Yeah, true.
Your character, Emmett, like, I do find it interesting, this kind of improving around this kind of thing, because, like, as we said, kind of partially, but there's a streak of horrible kind of misogyny to him, like when he's
Yeah.
you know, kind of looking at the girls he's kind of auditioned, and then like, oh, I thought I was slaying that in the schlei kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
great fun, and like there's some really kind of funny lines and stuff as well. Like, but there is like also, I suppose, a sense of them that like maybe he's just looking for a friendship and camaraderie. So
Yeah.
there's like an interesting kind of like grotesquerie and then kind of nice balance to him as well.
Yeah.
When you were improvising around that, did you always have to kind of keep within a certain level on that, like within the character, or was it like you just try something and then if it worked, it would be used in post?
Yeah, but I absolutely. I think if it's obscene, it's obscene, and it doesn't work comedically. You know what I mean? Like there's a literally there's a threshold that you can go to that it becomes, that's not funny, it's offensive. You know, and you know, in order to be funny, you kind of have to be slightly offensive. There has to be a nugget of truth in terms of the reality of the world. But you know, absolutely, I think. Yeah, there was never really any constraints, but I think comedically everyone kind of knew where you wouldn't go too, you wouldn't be that offensive, but it would definitely, you would try to push it as far as you possibly could without it being grotesque. But yeah, I suppose that's the merit of being trying to be good at comedy, is that you know it yourself. Yeah, but it's horrible, like the stuff that he says. It's horrific, but again, it's all within reality. We know that these conversations are being had behind closed doors, and
absolutely. And I think
you know?
you're spot on about that line in comedy, and I think you do it very well, because in isolation, some of the stuff he says, just like the character's monstrous, but when you actually watch the thing, there is like a redeeming thing behind his eyes, kind of partridgey as well. There's like
well, you know that you know that expression, he's harmless. I think he is harmless, but that doesn't mean that what he's saying isn't awful. But you know,
exactly. I think that's the way to describe. He's harmless. He needs a slap, but he's harmless, kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. But there's no malice.
There's also a number of kind of irritating and poorly timed video logs, or vlogs, sorry, kind of during the production of Emmett's sci-fi drama. Did you enjoy those?
Yeah. It's just the one where there was one I remember specifically, the asking for funding, and the camera keeps dropping down. That's very good. That's all Dáire, like then editing my face onto a bodybuilder's body.
That was actually cut from the film and became the trailer.
Well, there we go.
It's in the trailer.
Dáire, for you, like, I mean, it must have been kind of great fun to keep that on set, but were you like keeping, like, you know, when you kind of had those kind of scenes done, like, okay, that's the thing we're going to use, and did that like have any impact on later scenes you were going to shoot, that we that there and now that'll tip this off? And how did you do? So were you just kind of writing every day after a take?
Well, I had like the treatment already written, but yeah, if something had come up unexpectedly, I'd definitely make note of it. And I think there's a what becomes a running joke about social justice warriors, or Sijuas, which was entirely, that arose naturally during filming. Like, that wasn't scripted initially, but it was mentioned. I think during the first scene we shot in the film was the scene where it was first brought up, and then I kind of dropped it in a couple more times, and it forms a part of like a note that's written at the end of the film. So I just kind of I took note of that phrase, and then dropped it in a couple more times, like just add that into the treatment and the notes that we had for future days. Like, so yeah, it's kind of a case of just being aware of what's going on and tweaking as you go. Yeah,
that's great, because I would have thought that was like a joke in there from the start, like the kind of running joke of that.
Yeah, I think sorry, just one quick thing is like, yeah, just the way, if you do enough prep for filming something like this, and you're not kind of, you know, if the production is organized ahead of time, it gives you space to actually focus. But particularly when you're doing it yourself, like essentially like I was, I didn't have to worry about getting to locations by certain times, because I had all that kind of mostly mapped out. We were always kind of running a bit late as usual, but there was still enough space to kind of pay attention to what was going on. It was like, sometimes you can just be trying to get a scene finished and you can just miss little bits, the nuances that kind of come up. But you know, I put in the work ahead of time so that I was able to pay attention to what was actually been said, which is kind of a rare treat for me.
Brilliant. And I think we've got some other hand raised there. If you want to ask a question, just please use the Q&A button at top or bottom, and I'll definitely get to it. But Dáire, I just want to talk a little bit about Paul the cameraman and these t-shirts. Where did that come from?
I think that was an idea I had, just to have a very kind of bland guy, he's like 6'6". Brian Robinson, who plays him, he's 6'6", 6'7". He's a huge guy, I just like the idea of him being very. I think initially the idea I had of him was that he was a bit more kind of weary, and he just would kind of be rolling his eyes at Matthew's character a lot, and just have that would be his personality would basically be his t-shirts, and then he'd just be kind of a huge presence, but with no actual, emotional presence. But then Brian, who was playing him, had the idea that he'd actually be kind of just really keen to kind of impress. He sees Matthew. Initially, you can kind of see him lose respect for Matthew's character as the film goes on, but initially he's just he sees it as a great opportunity for himself, which of course you would if you're a young cameraman. It was just kind of a bit of a loser character. It was a way, I suppose, of that character expressing his limited personality. That was the idea initially, and then Brian kind of developed.
That comes across. It's terrific. It's a nice visual gag as well. I haven't seen before, especially as he's kind of said, with the kind of almost personalityless guy with a huge visual personality. Matthew, for you as well. In terms of the improv, I imagine this is very fun to shoot, as I said. But did you ever kind of have one of the other actors in a scene say something to you, and you just couldn't keep yourself together, or vice versa?
Yeah, no,
absolutely. Standout moments you remember?
Yeah, well, it's just Elliot in particular, because he's, again, the comedy works if it works when you have, and Dáire mentioned it earlier on, when you have someone who is able to play the serious against the more chaotic version, playing opposite him. So there was many times where I'd be riffing and Elliot would just give me that vacant stare, like you're talking absolute codswallop, and yeah, it would be tough sometimes, but I managed to keep it together. I did, however, the scene, I'm not giving anything away, but they're filming a sex scene in Dáire's parents' house, and I don't know why I said that very slowly, but anyway, they were filming it, and there was a moment where Emmett has a breakdown. Kind of everything's gone wrong. He's got his shirt off to try and relax them, and that was the moment where I kind of lost it, especially the reaction that Hannah and Elliot gave me, because it was just ridiculous. I had my top off, they had their tops off. We were in Dáire's mom and dad's house filming a sex scene. It just got too much.
Was it scripted that Emmett would remove his shirt at that point to make him comfortable, or was that just your natural reaction to the events unfolding?
It was scripted. That was Dáire's genius.
And Dáire, tell me, were there any particular, I suppose, you'd been through enough kind of feature projects at this point, exactly your own workflow and your style, but every film has challenges and things that need to be overcome, and I'm always just fascinated with these things, talking to directors who work in different styles like that. Is there anything particular you had to overcome in that that you found a solution to that might be interesting for someone else who's kind of making a film?
I can see Hannah's just joined us there.
Oh, hi Hannah, how are you doing? Sorry, Dáire, I'll come back to that question. Hannah, how are you doing?
How are you, Hannah?
I'm well. How are you?
Lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I'm late.
No worries. And I see you're on location as well, so that's
yeah, I am. Yeah.
well, Hannah, you're very welcome to join us. We've been talking to the guys about the making of The Last Roll, and Matthew and Dáire just filming us in on some of the interesting events, like when Matthew took his shirt off to make everyone feel more comfortable due to that scene being filmed in Dáire's parents' house.
It was the funniest thing ever. Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you as well, if I'll come back to that question to you, Dáire, in a second, but Hannah, for you, Dáire mentioned you knew each other going back along, but the way he works is there's a treatment and then you can improvise around that. What was it that made you really want to kind of work with this and work in that part?
Well, when he sent me on the script, I think the first thing that really leapt out to me was just how absolutely meta it seemed to be, because it was really apparent that there was this kind of film within a film trope going on. But then once I actually had a meeting with Dáire about it after the fact, he was mentioning how he was going to pepper the whole film with references to himself in it as well. So I thought it was so smart, and I thought it was just very, very weird and kind of Alan Partridge-y, and I love that it was both kind of funny, and the lead character is such a sham, and I just really enjoyed that there were so many levels to it, and every time you think you've come to the surface, you realize you're on bedrock.
And we've been talking a little bit with Matthew and Dáire about, I suppose, the kind of improvisational stuff around it. And
Yeah.
how did that appeal to you as an actor? Because I know you from a lot of your theatre work and stuff as well. But like, is this something that really appeals to you, like as a challenge, or something you really, really want to do?
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think it actually can sometimes generate quite a realistic result in the performances of your actors. But it also can lead to stuff that you would never have thought of. Like, for example, that scene where he takes his shirt off, and I remember when we were doing that. Do you guys remember this? There was all of these reasons as to why he's gotten himself into this position, and every time we did a take, there was a whole new reason. And I don't know, like, I am terrible at keeping a straight face, and every time a new thing was turned out, Matthew would be generating these things one after the other, and the whole room was just trying so desperately to keep it together. And I think the element of something unpredictable is really fun. And what's great is that, like, you can get that in a script anyway when it's written as well as this one was. But I just think there's that also, like, the element of when, like, a great idea happens and the mischief in it comes alive, really. I think that's great.
It's fantastic, and that's great to hear. It kind of really echoes what Matthew and Dáire have been saying so far. Dáire, just before Hannah joined us, they were just talking about some of the maybe challenges or any obstacles you faced that, like, you might have had to have a creative solution to, or did you have it all, like, just as you said, prepped so well? Like,
Yeah, sorry, I should have used the time Hannah was speaking there to think of an answer for that, because I didn't have one.
Back to you, Hannah, for a series of more questions.
A roving reporter, Hannah, in a field.
Yeah.
The only obstacle I can think of, well, there was one main one, was that we didn't have access to a location one night. I booked a place in Trinity College and the guy didn't show up to let us in. So my solution to that was to book it for about 2 weeks later and to go back in. So that was it.
That in the scale of challenges and obstacles of hurling films, like, where that's really low, and that, I think, speaks to, like, you know, the way you kind of work, that you can kind of deal with these things. Hannah, we'll just come back to you a little bit again. Like, you and Matthew, I think, have some great scenes together as well, but also you, and I'm going to mix up Elliot and Evan all the time, and Emmett, all the E's, sorry. But there's some great scenes, like, and as you said, you found it hard to keep a straight face. Some of the dialogue in A Hair's Breadth is terrific. Like, Dave, remember that laser scan I got a while back? Yes, lots of cancer. Like, and it's so kind of ridiculously phrased and stuff. But did you have fun with that kind of thing, and kind of having to, I suppose, act as someone acting in something terrible while acting in something aware of the thing it's?
Yeah, that was actually something that Dáire and I had to discuss a lot, where we were like, what's the character's position on how all this is? And I think that was something that Dáire had seen, like, when I came into the project, she'd really considered it to be like, no, this is something that she is just enjoying, and she's going to try it for a laugh. And, like, there was a real sense of self-knowledge in the character. So then when it came into stuff like how she responds to these people who are really not equity standard people,
to put it mildly.
There was a, I don't know, I thought there was something very insightful in it, where if you're someone who's joining those projects and you're just doing it for fun, you don't have that kind of, you're more forgiving of the standards that the people have. So yeah, that was something that I thought that was really impressively considered. And then when it came to the point where they have an argument where, you know, he's being quite protective of her, and he keeps telling her that she's making mistakes and stuff. I can remember, Darren, we were doing that scene, we had this whole idea of how the kind of argument they were going to do, and then Dáire and I were talking about it, and he was like, no, I think you should just kind of throw it away a bit more, because it just affirmed her with so much more self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-confidence and stuff, that I thought was really interesting in relation to where she falls in the plot, in the tiers of the plot going on. Because, you know, Matthew's character has this vision of what he's going to do and how he's going to achieve it, and she's kind of alongside Elliot, and how he's trying to make it all work as well. And I just thought there was interesting dynamics kind of between all the characters, and then among in that kind of relationship she has to the project at hand that they're trying to make. So yeah, it was interesting.
And the guys have spoken a bit about, I suppose, how they brought some of their own experiences. And Matthew has explained how he's an incredibly bitter former director who brought a lot of that to his own character. As an actress, were you able to kind of bring like any particular things you were able to kind of riff on or improvise around from any of your own experiences?
Well, I mean, people who have no idea how to speak to people is a universal experience. I think, like particularly the scene in the bar where Matthew and I are trying to talk, and he has all these ideas, and she's like, "Okay, like I don't know what to say to you." I guess as well, like I mean, everyone has to start somewhere. So the amount of like Amdram films you work on and stuff, there's a little bit of a morsel of everything in the stuff that they create when they're trying to make stuff work, and particularly when he has such a huge vision far beyond his capabilities and his budget. I think that's something I'm sure all of us have experienced before.
Yeah, he was the perfect example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where someone is so incompetent that they're incapable of being competent and looking at their own levels of ability.
Does that make him like a perfect candidate for absolute success? Because he has no knowledge of the boundaries. He has no knowledge of the obstacles in his way. He'll just trundle right through them and ruin.
I think the last role too, you could definitely cut back to him being in charge of a massive franchise somewhere. You could bring back Matthew. Dáire, if we could talk a little bit about the edit, I just want to talk about your process on that, because obviously you mentioned again with the kind of riffing on things and putting stuff together. Were you doing like a paper edit as you went, or did you kind of have a bit of a kind of difficult editing process, kind of getting everything to kind of flow together?
It was just a case of sitting down for several months and just chipping away at it. Like, you know, it was I knew as I was filming what I was getting. You know, as I said, I knew at the end of every scene that I got what I wanted, what I needed. I hit the kind of the story marks, and then I had a few other things that I could kind of play about with. You know, I had options, I suppose. So it was just a case of just getting the balance right between, you know, bits that are funny but don't have to be there, and then paying attention to kind of the story and trying to get, like, not make it too long, but not kind of have long stretches without humor, because there are some longish stretches without humor, but hopefully, like particularly towards the end. But then there's a couple of big laughs in the last maybe 5-10 minutes as well. So just trying to kind of pace it out.
They work very well though, in terms of like that kind of like, you know, you can't just have gag. You have to kind of like give a little breathing room. I think Mitchell Webb did a great sketch a while back about, okay, we're going to do these sketches. That's a hit. That's a miss. Hit. Miss. Just to build that rhythm, which is really good. I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, some of the festivals it's played and, like, you know, how it looks to people. But we're just go back to Matthew and Hannah a bit first. Matthew or Hannah, sorry. What was there any particular standout scene you really enjoyed doing, and having seen it in the film subsequently?
I think we had such good fun doing the scene where she dies, where Felix dies, and within the whole scene, Matthew's character sexually harasses someone, and like it's trying to navigate it all, and just I thought it was just so funny. And I think when you're doing stuff like that, you kind of have to laugh, because it's nearly too real. I thought that was great fun. The stuff where we were kind of in really familiar settings, like we were shooting, because we had a few shots that we did in the pub, and we had a few shots that we did with the green screen stuff. I don't know, the whole thing was very enjoyable from start to finish. I think particularly because, like, Dáire had such a gentle touch on it, so we did have kind of free reign to mess about and stuff. And then, like, for example, for my character, she's very much like the straight, you know, man. So, you know, she's the sounding board for the audience to see how absolutely insane everyone is. So I don't know, I found it very fun, people trying to throw their funniest material at you, and then you're just trying to clamp it shut and keep it together. It was good fun.
And Matthew, for you?
Well, I'm starting to get flashbacks of different things. I do remember running on a beach with a fake pair of boobs on. That was good fun. And then the car scene where I'm trying to convince Elliot to be in the film and that it's going to be profit share. They were two. Well, I saw them subsequently. I thought they worked quite well. But again, my favorite, I think, is the
bedroom.
the bedroom scene.
Yeah, it
I
was
just
just
think, I
so
think
funny.
all the elements came together, you know, it's all falling apart, and it's just, I love that. I really like that.
If
I
you were to
think when
show
we
someone
did
one
that-
scene of the film to explain it, I think it would probably be that.
Yeah,
I think well, when we shot that scene, it was nearly the first time where everyone in it was all together, all at the same time, and the plot, like, it's the climactic enough point of this in the film. So like, you're just so aware of where we're at in the story, and everyone's in there together, and everyone's having a laugh, and
yeah,
great.
it's great.
Bob, and Dáire, for you, before we get on to the film screening, many places around the world, did you have a particular favorite scene to film and to work on?
Well, not to, you know, rehash what they've just said, but the kind of the sex scene / breakdown scene at the end, I think as well, yeah, as Tana said, everyone was there together, but also because of the shooting style, it was like almost shot in real time. Like we did actually break that up, which contradicts what I said earlier. We broke that up into like a few chunks, because it's like a 10-minute scene. We couldn't film that start to finish. There's a lot going on, but we'd kind of take 20-25 minutes on each chunk and then move on to the next one. So we're moving very fast through it. And you know, I think we had time pressure that day. There was like, I think Matthew had to get home, and there was a birthday party for Hannah's partner as well that was on. So like there was a lot of so that was actually one day where like we really had to kind of chase the clock a bit, and we shot that so fast, but it just, you could see it coming together in front of you, so it was great.
Brilliant.
I have to just say, I can remember that when we did the screening, so we did a crew and cast screening, and I had forgotten that, you know, when you're doing films like this, you're not really talking about the plot or anything to anyone, you know. You're only really engaging with what's actually happening in the film with the people you're working on the film with. And so when we did the screening, we each had a +1, and so when my partner came to see it, he had no idea what to expect, and I had realized I hadn't told him a thing, and so that was really funny as well, because one of the actors had come over to him and he's like, "Oh, did you realize like there's a few topless scenes in it?" And he was like, "What?" Like, that was really funny when it comes out and how it all pans out. It was really funny.
And how is it for you guys seeing it on the big screen? Like, it's traveled all over the world. Like, it's obviously some online festivals as well at the time and stuff. But for you, Dáire, how was it seeing on like that screening in the first place, where Hannah's poor partner was unaware of what type of film he was going to see?
Yeah, that was great. Like, because it was, yeah, like Matthew wasn't there that day, but everyone else who was on the film was there, and it was kind of a nice kind of payoff. You know, after, I think it was November 2019, and we shot it in January 2019, so it was, you know, a good bit down the line, but it was just kind of a nice, because making it was such an enjoyable process, so it was kind of like the final part of that process, just being able to see it with everyone except Matthew.
Sorry.
Yeah. I forgive
Matthew,
you.
where did you get
That
to
was
see
the
the
best
film?
part. He wasn't there.
I got to watch it at home on my television. That's about it. I didn't get to see it on the big screen, but yeah, no, I mean, as soon as I got to see it, I obviously emailed Dáire and congratulated him like that, because again, what Hannah was saying, when you are doing it, you're so steeped in just the scenes and getting the scene done that you sometimes lose sight of the overall picture. And I really thought you did a fantastic job there. I really did. I think there's really wonderful moments of pathos and stuff like that, as well as, yeah, these big bombastic scenes, which were class.
Well, I think that's what works best about like some of the influence you said, like The Office and stuff, especially as well. Like, it does have those moments of kind of deep kind of pathos as well within the comedy, and one can't really work with the other. It works really well. The film's played like about 40 different festivals, Dáire, you're saying, and it's won award, like, I mean, nearly like somewhere between 50 and 20 awards, I believe, as well. How's that response been for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting, as we were talking before this. You know, a lot of the pretty much all the festivals happened during COVID. There's still a few that it's going to show in some next year, and I don't know whether it's going to be, you know, again online, because some, you know, so not next year, this year. I forgot that it's 2022 already.
It is next year.
Yeah. But later on in the year, so you know, some of those festivals have been postponed, like, you know, a year at this point, so they're hoping to show it in person. But yeah, it's been kind of odd, because I haven't been at an in-person screening since that cast and crew one in November 2019. I obviously wouldn't have been able to go to all the 40 whatever festivals, and the lockdown actually probably gave me more money because I wasn't able to spend money on anything. So I had money to enter festivals. So, you know, it mightn't have even been entered into 40 festivals if life
Yeah.
had continued as normal. So like there's ups and downs, but yeah, it's kind of an odd situation where it's hard. Like I've got emails from around the world from people who've seen it at festivals, but it's hard to know if it's actually getting anywhere or if it's going to open any doors. But like, you know, I'm just happy enough that it's out there, and you know, like opportunities like this are great as well, just to kind of, because we shot it 3 years ago, but you know, it still kind of hasn't officially come out yet. So like, you know, it's you know, hopefully something will happen down the line. Yeah, and the more festivals, the more awards, and the more exposure I guess, the better, I suppose.
Oh, we're certainly happy to help with that. I have a question in here from Claire Walsh, wondering what advice would you give to an emerging filmmaker looking to make a film with a highly improvisational style?
I would say do the groundwork, kind of like, you know, have the structures in place, have locations kind of boxed off for as long as you can have them. Probably, I wouldn't say necessarily as few locations as possible, because you don't want it to be just people talking in a room for, well, I don't know if it's a short film or a feature, but you know, you kind of need a few different locations. So to think visually, but be realistic in terms of what you can afford, what you can have access to for time. You know, outside can be good, but there's noise issues. You know, but if you find somewhere, you know, outside where it's quiet, you know, and you get lucky with the weather, you can kind of film all day. I would think about the style as well. Like you'd probably need to be quite loose. You know, I wouldn't suggest having like a director of photography who's very, you know, anal about framing and stuff, because you know that'll just get in the way of the. If you're going to focus on the improv, just like everything should be about letting the actors, giving the actors space to kind of work within. And also there's no
like preparing enough that you can allow for spontaneity. Everything is.
Yeah, it's like you do kind of the boring stuff ahead of time, and then they can kind of cut loose on the day if you've kind of got all the stuff in place, and if the location's sorted, and if you have, you know, the crew or know what's going on, and you've talked to them, like, and you've rehearsed with the cast, then you know, then that actually provides more room for, you know, for it to be fresh on the day. Yeah, the more legwork you put in beforehand, the more space you'll have like on the day to kind of experiment.
No worries. We have another question here, which is kind of the inverse of that, from Sean John, which I'm sure is not your real name, Sean, but thank you for sending your question. And it's to the actors, Matthew and Hannah, asking what advice would you give to actors for approaching something like this in an improvisational spirit if they haven't done so before? Matthew, maybe start with you.
Okay. That's a really complex question, but very good one.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean John. I think you have to come at it totally open. I would add as well what Dáire was saying, just in terms of improvisation in general, to workshop it and to pick it apart, but as best as you can, try not to overthink too much and respond in the moment to whatever you're getting. I find in particular, I'm kind of what we call in Navan a bit of a sneer, which helps, especially when you, on your day-to-day business, kind of pick apart things, which is a hobby of mine. Famously, Tommy Tiernan used to say they'd hang outside hairdressers and sneer at young ones and their new haircuts. But I think that's the thing. And observation is key too. That you can tell the story, but also in your environment, as we were mentioning there, use that to your advantage as well. But instinct over intellect, that's for sure. Have all the prep, as Dáire was saying there, that you know where you have to start and you know where you have to end, but in the middle, have as much fun as you possibly can. If it's comedy, if it's a big intellectual piece, maybe not so much fun. Serious somberness. Yeah.
Great advice there, Matthew. Thank you. And Hannah, for you.
I think know what the through line is. In the same way, so when you learn your lines for theatre, you'll kind of know them in the back ways and front ways and upside down and inside out, so that you have a freedom with it, that you can play with it tonally or like rhythmically or what have you. I think when you're doing improv, your through line, which is the action and the order in which things need to happen to progress the plot in that particular scene, you have to know that in order to be able to improvise well. Once you know that, once you kind of know where you're going to steer it, I think then you can just be free with it. And also, I would say, be sure you kind of know what the character is like, and what, I know this is really maybe too structured thinking, but maybe what their role is in the film itself. So, for example, for me, when Matthew and I were kind of bumping off one another, it was very important that Matthew's character is the one who's bringing up these crazy things, and she's the one who has to respond like a normal person. So that's something that's important to hang on to. Like, I think knowing what your role is in the film, and knowing what has to happen in the film or in a given scene, and then exactly, I would totally echo what Matthew said. Just say yes to everything and try not to laugh. Ruin the
Brilliant. Sean John has come back here and just said it's Sean Johnson, but it got cut off. But I'm gonna, in the spirit of improv, go with Sean John from now on. Thank you.
Keep it. Also, ignore all of my advice and just follow Hannah's Sean Johnson. That's his name.
So guys, just before we finish up, I just want to ask you, what do you have cooking up next? What's next for you guys? So Dáire, if I can turn to you first on that.
I kind of have a few ideas that I'm working on. I've done a bit of writing over lockdown, but I've kind of held off on getting any wheels in motion, because until I'm absolutely certain that there won't be another stoppage of everything, because I'm at the moment funding them all myself as well, so I can't afford to spend money on anything or book flights for an actor or anything, until I'm kind of relatively assured that it'll actually be able to go ahead. So I think this year I'm just going to do some writing of like stories and scripts, and then hopefully next year maybe get around to shooting something. But I'm keeping it loose at the moment and not committing to anything.
Is there any chance of any of the characters from the last role returning in another installment of the Dáire-verse?
I have a pretty well developed idea for a second film that would involve all the principals. I think pretty much every single character would actually be back. So yeah, so hopefully at some point.
That's great. And Matthew, for you, what do you're working down in Cork at the moment, I believe?
Yeah, I'm down shooting The Gates with Jonathan Rhys Davies at the moment, with Steve Hall. So it's good fun, and that finishes now the mid-February, and I'll be back home then to Meath, and hopefully there'll be work waiting for me in a month or two. But sure, who knows?
That's life. Thanks, Matthew. And Hannah, for yourself.
Yeah, I finished working on a film. Sorry, there's a motorcycle passing by, but I finished working on a film there recently called My Sailor, My Love. That was really enjoyable, and I think that's going to get released at some stage this year. And I've recently relocated to London, so who knows? What's going to happen? Hey. I hear there's a fun film coming up with a writer I just worked with called McNab. So.
Well, guys, I've really enjoyed talking to you today about The Last Role. Please do keep us updated on his progress, Dáire. Thank you at home for tuning in, and Sean John, especially you for your questions. We'll be back tomorrow, where we're going to be talking to Robbie Walsh and some of the team behind The Letters. And then on Friday, we'll be talking to the teams behind on Colleen Kuhn and Deadly Cuts. So please do keep an eye on IFTA and join in for those as well. But for now, thank you very much to Dáire, Matthew and Hannah, and congrats on The Last Role. Have a great week.